illusion, you shall become indifferent to all that has been heard and all that is to be heard. Purport. There are many good examples in the lives of the great devotees of the Lord, of those who became indifferent to the rituals of the Vedas simply by devotional service to the Lord. When a person factually understands Krishna and his relationship with Krishna, he naturally becomes completely indifferent to the rituals of fruitive activities, even though an experienced Brahmana. Sri Madhavendra Puri, a great devotee and acharya in the line of the devotee, says, Sandhya Vandana Badram Astu Bhavatu Bo Snana Tubiyam Namo Bo Deva Piratas Cha Tarpana Vidau Naham Kashama Yatham Yatra Kvapi Ni Sadhya Yadva Kulo Tam Sasya Kam Sadvisha Smaram Smaram Agam Harami Tad Alam Manye Kim Anyena Me. Oh, my prayers 3 times a day. All glory to you, O bathing. I offer my obeisance unto you, O demigods, O forefathers. Please excuse me for my inability to offer you my respects. Now, wherever I sit, I can remember the great descendant of the Yadu dynasty, Krishna, the enemy of Kamsa, and thereby I can free myself from all sinful bondage. I think this is sufficient for me. The Vedic rites and rituals are imperative for neophytes, comprehending all kinds of prayer 3 times a day, taking a bath early in the morning, offering respects to the forefathers, etc. But when one is fully in Krishna consciousness and is engaged in his transcendental loving service, one becomes indifferent to all these regulative principles because he has already attained perfection. If one can reach the platform of understanding by service to the Supreme Lord Krishna, he has no longer to execute different types of penances and sacrifice as recommended in revelate scriptures. And similarly, if one has not understood that the purpose of the Vedas is to reach Krishna and simply engages in the rituals, etc., then he is uselessly wasting time in such engagements. Persons in Krishna consciousness transcend the limit of Sabda Brahma, or the range of the Vedas and Upanishads.
All right, so Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada is in his purport here, he's quoted this verse by Madhavendra Puri. So Madhavendra Puri was a very important person in the disciplic succession, and he is before Lord Chaitanya. He came before Lord Chaitanya, and because of Madhavendra Puri, Lord Chaitanya was attracted to take initiation in the same line of disciplic succession. But Madhavendra Puri brought something very special into the Sampradaya. He brought into the Sampradaya, he brought the mood of ecstatic love for Krishna. This what we would call Raga Bhakti, spontaneous devotion to Krishna. So this is, of course, an advanced level. Prabhupada talks in the purport. He said, for neophytes, it's important to do things like, our bathing and offering prayers and offering respects to so many different devas and so on, that this is important in the neophyte stage. But when one becomes advanced in Krishna consciousness, and he becomes more conscious of Krishna, then these things are not so important, because these are just some rituals. So, just like in the verse, Lord Krishna was saying, when your intelligence is passed out of the dense forest of delusion. So the forest of delusion is where we become attached to all these kind of rituals and different things which we do in the material world. So when we go beyond that, then we come to the higher consciousness. And that's Krishna consciousness. The purpose of all of these rituals is to awaken our Krishna consciousness. So in the beginning, you do these rituals, and gradually you do these rituals. By doing them, gradually we can awaken Krishna consciousness. We'll go ahead, unless there's any questions.
No, Guru Maharaj.
Okay.
No question.
So let's go ahead.
2.53, Tanmay Prabhu, do you want to read it?
Sure, Mataji, thank you. Shruti viprutipanna te yada sthasyosti nischala samadha vachala buddhistada yogo vapsasi. Translation: when your mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, and when it remains fixed in the trance of self-realization, then you will have attained the divine consciousness. Purport: to say that one is in samadhi is to say that one has fully realized Krishna consciousness. That is, one in full samadhi has realized Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. The highest perfection of self-realization is to understand that one is eternally the servitor of Krishna, and that one's only business is to discharge one's duties to Krishna's consciousness. A Krishna conscious person or unflinching devotee of the Lord should not be disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, nor be engaged in fruitive activities for promotion to the heavenly kingdom. In Krishna consciousness, one comes directly into communion with Krishna, and thus all directions from Krishna may be understood in that transcendental state. One is sure to achieve results by such activities and attain conclusive knowledge. One has only to carry out the orders of Krishna or his representative, the spiritual master.
Okay, so Lord Krishna was mentioning about the Shruti. Shruti means the Vedic literature, right? There are two divisions of the Vedic knowledge. There's the Shruti and the Smriti. Now this Bhagavad Gita generally, although this is the actual words of Lord Krishna, because it's coming from the Mahabharata, it's also in the category of Smriti. So the Shruti are the original four Vedas. Four Veda. Originally it was one Veda, then divided into four. The Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva Veda. Four Vedas. And the Vedic literature has a lot of what is described here as flowery language. Flowery language. In other words, they'll describe things like the heavenly planets, the enjoyment to go to the higher planets, and to, you know, and they will describe it in very nice nice words, nice language. The words will be very pleasing and, you know, well composed, beautiful Sanskrit poetry. So one can become very attached to hearing these words of the Vedas or reciting them. But the real purpose is to go understand the purpose behind the Vedas. Not that we should just become attached to reciting the Vedas. So therefore Krishna says, when your mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, because there's a tendency of the mind to become absorbed in hearing this language of the Vedas, and we think, oh, very nice, without knowing the purpose behind it. So this is important. It's not just to, you know, hear the Vedas and recite them, but we should know the purpose behind it. It's very important for us. So Lord Krishna then speaks about remaining, when the mind remains fixed in the trance of self-realization, then you have attained divine consciousness. So the mind has to transcend the bodily concept of life, not just become attached to the sweet sounds, but become fixed in self-realization, understanding ourselves as spirit soul. And that's only part of self-realization. We have to go on to understand the relationship between the individual and the Supreme Soul, between the living entity and the Supreme Lord. That is actual self-realization. So there are different stages of self-realization. Prabhupada mentioned Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan. Brahman, the energy of the Lord, the impersonal aspect of the Lord. Paramatma, the Lord in his all-pervading feature as the super soul within all living entities. And Bhagavan, the original supreme personality of Godhead. Actual self-realization is to understand our relationship with the Lord, with Bhagavan, how he is the master and we are all his servants. So we shouldn't be disturbed by the attraction to the heavenly planets or the sweet sounds which are offered in the Vedas, but we should know the purpose behind them. Right? The purpose behind the Vedas is to know Krishna, Krishna consciousness. And that's described, of course, in the 15th chapter. Krishna said, by all the Vedas, I am to be known. I am the author and I am the compiler of the Vedas. The whole purpose of the Vedas is to come to know Krishna. But sometimes the thought of Krishna gets lost and people just become absorbed in the poetic descriptions and the language of the Vedas. They recite the Vedas very nicely, but they don't know the purpose behind them. Just like in our Krishna consciousness movement, we often sing different devotional songs. And so the devotional songs are usually in Bengali, some are in Sanskrit. So Srila Prabhupada said, very important that we should know the meaning behind them. He said, if you don't know the meaning, there's no purpose. So we have to understand, just like every day we sing songs like Guru Vastikam and Guru Vandana and Gora Arti, we should know the meaning behind all of these different songs which we're singing. So similarly, when you read the Vedas, you should understand the meaning behind them. Then you can come to divine consciousness. All right? Any question? If there are no questions, we'll go on to the next sloka.
Yes, Guru Maharaj. Piranglo Prabhuji, do you want to read this 2.54?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you.
Arjuna Uvacha Shtita Prajasya Kabasra Samari Stasya Keshava Stita Dritti Kim Prabhasita Kim Asta Vrajita Kim. Translation. Arjuna said, O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak? And what is his language? How does he sit? And how does he walk? Purport. As there are symptoms for each of every man in terms of his particular situation, similarly, one who is Krishna conscious has his particular nature, talking, walking, thinking, feeling, etc. As a rich man has his symptoms by which he is known as a rich man, as a diseased man has his symptoms by which he is known as diseased, or as a learned man has his symptoms, so a man in transcendental consciousness of Krishna has specific symptoms in various dealings. One can know his specific symptoms from the Bhagavad Gita. Most important is how the man in Krishna consciousness speaks. For speech in the most important quality of any man. Most important is how the man in Krishna consciousness speaks. For speech in the most important quality of any man. It is said that a fool is undiscovered as long as he does not speak. And certainly a well-dressed fool cannot be identified unless he speaks. But as soon as he speaks, he reveals himself at once. The immediate symptom of a Krishna conscious man is that he speaks only of Krishna and of matters relating to him. Other symptoms then automatically follows, as stated below.
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
So Arjuna's question, because Krishna was speaking about divine consciousness, in the previous sloka we heard, one attains the divine consciousness. So Arjuna wants to understand, what is this divine consciousness? What are the symptoms? How will we know? So Arjuna asks, how does he speak? What is his language? Now, when he says, what is his language? He doesn't mean, does he speak English, or does he speak French, or German, or Bengali, or what? No, he wants to understand more the manner of his language. It's not in terms of, is he speaking Sanskrit, or is it English? No, not like that. But he wants to know the mood in which the man is speaking, and how he is talking, and how does he sit, how does he walk. How does he sit means how does he act when he's not engaging in activities, and how does he walk, how does he act when he is engaging in doing something. So Arjuna wants to understand more the nature of a person who is in the divine consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada mentions in his purport, he says, of all the qualities, the quality of speech is the most important. And Prabhupada talks, he said, one may be a well-dressed fool, because Srila Prabhupada, of course, traveled a lot when he was traveling in the West, around the world. And so he was in airports and he saw people, he would see many people well-dressed, but he could also hear them. He could hear them speaking, and he could know what kind of people they were. So Prabhupada mentions how there are some people, they're just well dressed, but they're foolish because they're just talking some nonsense thing. They just talk some garbage, nothing of any importance. So Prabhupada said the quality of speech is the most important matter, item in which we can understand who is in divine consciousness. Because one who is actually in divine consciousness, they want to speak about Krishna or things in relationship to Krishna. That may be also the creation of the world and the maintenance of the world. Krishna is involved in everything. There's nothing separate from Krishna. So one who is in Krishna consciousness, they will talk about Krishna, then they will relate the material world, they will relate everything in their life, and everything which is going on, which is taking place in the world. They'll relate it to Krishna consciousness. And if people are not talking about Krishna consciousness, then one who is a devotee will not be much interested to hear it. There was one very great devotee. He was a disciple of Gorkishore Das Babaji. So his name was Vamsi Das Babaji. And Vamsi Das Babaji, he didn't like to talk mundane things. So if anybody would ask him, what do you think about the government? He would say, Govardhan. You know, he wouldn't hear government. He would just hear, he would make the word government Govardhan. And he would say, what, Govardhan? Govardhan? You know, and this way he would change the subject matter to something transcendental and something divine. We were just hearing also about Madhavendra Puri in the previous sloka. We had the quotation from Madhavendra Puri. So Madhavendra Puri also, he did not like to talk mundane things. And for that purpose, he was usually alone. He would go everywhere on his own. He didn't take anybody with him. Although he was a great devotee, very elevated, and he had many disciples, but he didn't keep them with him. You know, he had initiated Advaita Acharya. Advaita Acharya had surrendered to him. Pundarik Vijayanidhi was a disciple of Madhavendra Puri. He was a very, very great devotee, but he liked to be alone. He would go alone because then he could be more internally absorbed in thinking of Krishna. But he found that, you know, other people, common people come and they just disturb the mind and take the mind away from Krishna. So he liked to be on his own. All right, any questions about this?
Guru Maharaj, is Madhavendra Puri is the one who introduced the worship of Radharani, Guru Maharaj? Or before, I was hearing that somewhere that before that there was only Krishna worship and after there is worship of Radharani.
Well, I don't know if he had actually introduced the worship of Radharani, but certainly he introduced that mood of spontaneous loving devotion, which is the mood of Radharani. He cultivated that Radha Bhav, you know, that ecstatic love for Krishna in the mood of the gopis, which was shown by Srimati Radharani. So Madhavendra Puri was the one who introduced this into the Sampradaya. And because of this, Lord Chaitanya took initiation in that line. He wanted to be connected to Madhavendra Puri. Because Madhavendra Puri, he had this ecstatic love for Krishna. And when he was leaving the body, at the time of Madhavendra Puri leaving the body, he recited a verse which was spoken by Srimati Radharani. And it said that only Srimati Radharani And Madhavendra Puri and Lord Chaitanya could understand the meaning of this verse. The verse is about Srimati Radharani feeling separation from Lord Krishna. So Madhavendra Puri was such an elevated devotee that he could understand this verse, which only Radharani and Lord Chaitanya could understand. He was the third person to understand it. So it's true, Lord Chaitanya certainly encouraged, he also gave prominence to Radha Krishna worship, and after after Lord Chaitanya, then Lord Nityananda's consort, Janava Mataji, she would add deities of Radharani beside the deity of Krishna. Many temples would only be worshipping Krishna, but she would come and she would add a deity of Srimati Radharani beside the Krishna deity, made the worship more complete in this sense. Prabhupada said Krishna is never alone. Krishna comes in the world, he comes along with his energies and his potencies and so many different associates. They all come with him. Nanda Maharaj, Mother Yashoda, Vasudeva and Devaki, they all came before him. Some come before, some come after. But they come to be with Lord Krishna and to take part in his pastime. He doesn't come on his own, just like a king doesn't come on his own. He comes with an entourage. And some people will come before to make sure everything's ready for the king or for the emperor. And then after the emperor goes, then somebody will be behind to put everything back together and put everything in its place. So similarly with Lord Krishna. All right, so this is the question. We'll hear the answers, how Lord Krishna answers.
Yes, Guru Maharaj. 2.55 Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Prajahyati Yada Kaman Sarvan Partha Manogatan Atmani Evatmana Tushtaha Sita Prajnastadochyate. Translation, Helena Mataji, do you want to read this?
Purport, you mean? Translation.
Yeah.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. Purport. The Bhagavatam affirms that any person who is fully in Krishna consciousness or devotional service of the Lord has all the good qualities of the great sages, whereas a person who is not so transcendentally situated has no good qualifications, because he is sure to be taking refuge in his own mental conscience. Consequently, it is rightly said herein that one has to give up all kinds of sense desire manufactured by mental concoction. Artificially, such sense desires cannot be stopped, but if one is engaged in Krishna's consciousness, then automatically sense desires subside without extraneous efforts. Therefore, one has to engage himself in Krishna's consciousness without hesitation. For this, devotional service will instantly help one onto the platform of transcendental consciousness. The highly developed soul always remains satisfied in himself by realizing himself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord. Such a transcendentally situated person has no sense desires resulting from petty materialism. Rather, he remains always happy in his natural position of eternally serving the Supreme Lord.
All right. So Krishna is responding to Arjuna's question, how to recognize someone in divine consciousness. So he mentions, first of all, that gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification. So this is the important point, that somebody in Krishna consciousness, they have no interest in sense gratification, right? They're not interested in sense gratification because they're so busy in satisfying Krishna's senses. They're thinking their happiness is in satisfying the senses of Krishna. That is the happiness of the devotee. So people, impersonalists, Mayavadis, they're struggling, trying to control the senses, and yogis also, they're trying to control the senses, and they're working very hard. They try to stop the senses, but the process of devotional service is not to stop the senses, but is to use the senses in Krishna's service. That is the actual better way to control the mind and senses. Not to just stop them, but to use them in Krishna's service. And when we engage our senses in Krishna consciousness, then we experience also the pleasure of that. We experience the satisfaction and the happiness which comes from being connected in Krishna's service. When we connect to Krishna, naturally we'll experience the spiritual pleasure which comes from connection to Krishna. Just like when you plug your electric device into the socket, then immediately you get the power flowing. So in the same way, when we connect to Krishna's service, then we experience also the spiritual energy. All right, any questions? Find satisfaction in the self alone. Satisfaction in the self. We're all looking for that satisfaction, trying to find some satisfaction. We're thinking maybe the new house, a new car, the new job, something maybe we're trying to satisfy ourselves. But the real satisfaction is within. We have to satisfy the soul, the need of the soul. And the soul needs to connect to Krishna, to the Supreme Soul. And then we can actually feel this pure transcendental consciousness. So a change in consciousness from material consciousness to devotional consciousness. Not just spiritual consciousness, but devotional consciousness. Impersonalist, Mayavadi, Jnani, they may be also on the platform of spiritual consciousness. They've understood that they're not the body, but they have not understood their relationship with the Supreme Lord. So their process is stopping the senses. Don't see any evil. Don't speak. Don't touch. Don't look. But our process is to do everything in Krishna consciousness. Not to stop activities, but to purify them by connecting them to Krishna. That is yoga, right? That's the yoga of devotion, bhakti yoga. Connecting to Krishna by service. The soul's nature is to be active. If you try to stop activities, you won't be happy for long. We have to have activity. Is it clear?
Yes, it is completely clear. I have a question, Maharaj.
Yes, Prabhu.
It's about connection, contact with people, association. Because it's so clear what is in Bhagavad Gita, what you explain now is so clear. But after I say goodbye and I go back, with my habits, my mind concoctions, and so I have to have regular connection with association with Krishna conscious people. Otherwise, I feel I will not be able to make it by myself.
Yes.
Mm. Mm. A little bit opposite of Madhavendra Puri.
Yes. Well, Madhavendra Puri, he is a very,
yes.
He's so great soul, that even before Lord Chaitanya's time, Lord Chaitanya is taking inspiration from Madhavendra Puri. But we need association. But you have to find out the right association, which will nourish your bhakti, where you get the opportunity to hear and chant, to hear about Krishna. It's not that just somebody say, well, I'm a devotee, and then they'll talk all nonsense and talk all garbage. No, we have to talk about Krishna. We have to hear about Krishna. So we're studying this Bhagavad Gita. This is we may have read it many times, but there's no harm to read it again and again and go through it. And every time you'll find something new. Although I'm reading this Bhagavad Gita for so many years now, but still I get more every day. Every time I read, I get something new. Something comes to me. I appreciate some point which is made there. There's just so much there. So it's important for us to keep reading and to try to think about it and hold on to it. Let it go deep into our heart, and we'll hold on to something that's important. All right?
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. All right. Thank you very much. Yes.
So Vaishnavi, I think we can chant japa now.
Yes, Guru Maharaj.
Okay. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasati Gaur, Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hari Bol. Thank you, Guru
Hare
Maharaj.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Gaur Bhaktavinda ki.
Jai.
Jai.
So everyone take care there. Keep healthy.
Yes, Guru Maharaj.
Wish you good luck.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Guru Maharaj.
See you next week, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna to everyone.
Thank you very much, Prabhupada. Haribol.
Haribol.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.